This is Monica Kelsey from Beyond the Box in Woodburn, Indiana. I am not on the road today, and today we have a special guest who has been with us since the beginning, Mr. Casey Cox from Indiana. I'm not going to tell you the city where you're from, but from the Fort Wayne area, let's just put it that way, from the Fort Wayne area that literally kind of rode this wave with me from the beginning. And so tell everyone who doesn't know who you are why you're so important to Monica Kelsey.
Well, thanks for having me here, Monica. It's always so great to come out to Woodburn and see the growth of this organization and hear about the lives that you all are touching and changing. And as we've talked in the past, it's my role in this. I always consider a small role, but it was at the beginning, and
It was at the beginning.
exciting to be a part of that. I served in the Indiana House of Representatives from 2013 to 2016. And I think we met probably 2014.
Right.
So it was just a brief time that I was in there. But you were introduced to me through a mutual friend, Kathy Hamburger.
Yep.
And it as I recall, it coincided really well because I had read about. I was actually your state representative at the time.
You was.
And
You was. And you're being very bashful right now. Why don't you just say it? You passed the very first baby box bill in America.
yeah,
That's what you did.
yeah, it was. It was.
Okay, so now
well, it
we
was
can
a
keep
great
talking. Let's keep talking.
You brought the concept up, and
Yeah.
and it was great to put pen to paper and go through what some of the parameters might look like to make sure that that this concept could be put into law. And we weren't successful the first time, but
Right.
with your endeavors, we eventually got there.
So let's go back to that kind of that, first time that we met.
Mhm.
So you had kind of been working on something similar with education on the safe haven law because there was no education on the safe haven law prior to this. I mean, we passed a law in Indiana back in 2001 that said, women can surrender their babies at fire stations and hospitals, but they have to just walk in and hand their child to a person.
Yeah.
And no questions asked, but there was no training for the first responders or education for the communities. And so you were just basically trying to bring that out, let's get some education in that. And then here I come, both, just rolling up going, hey, what do you think about a baby box concept? And so what was your first thought? You had to have thought I was nuts because I think I remember a time, Casey, when you actually said, I thought this was going to be on the outside of the building, after I had installed it. And so what was your thoughts?
I thought it was wild. No, I honestly thought it was a great idea. So you're right. I didn't know that the safe haven laws existed. I didn't know that they were. I think they were in all 50 states.
Yep.
Passed in the early 2000s, and I read about this right before I'm introduced to you, and it was also around the same time that there was a fatal abandonment in Indianapolis.
Yep.
And I get introduced to you, and you have this idea. Because had you come back from South Africa?
Yes.
Yeah. And I thought, wow, this may be it. I mean, there's this law that makes a lot of sense to me from a policy standpoint. It seems to be really underutilized. I don't have any answers as to how to promote it or what to do with it, but I'm in a position in the legislature to maybe do something like that. And you bring out this great idea.
And you're also a lawyer.
I'm a lawyer.
You're also an
attorney.
attorney.
We met in my law office. It's the first time I think we ever met. Yeah.
And so from a perspective of being, a representative, but also a lawyer, could you see those things intertwining, like bringing this to reality in the United States to help save, because we were finding about 2 babies dead in our state, just in the state of Indiana every year prior to this.
Yeah.
And so baby Amelia is the baby that was highly publicized out of Indiana that was found in Eagle Creek Woods.
Yeah.
And so that was fresh in people's mind back then. That there was a dead baby that was found in Indianapolis, and that now here we come, we want to try and change this and make it something that is, there's no shame and there's no judgment involved from a woman that doesn't have to show her face. And so from that aspect, could you see it intertwining?
Yeah, I remember to that point, I remember after you and I had met and you brought forth this idea, I went on vacation and I remember my family had gone to bed and I set up with my laptop trying to write provisions like what it would look like in Indiana code, which the legal background helps. And usually when a legislator writes, they don't write their own bills usually, but I always like to try to use my legal background to sketch out what I thought it might look like, and then that gets sent off to a legislative services group, and then they work on it from there. But but looking at like the potential liabilities and then how um, the language that might be used in the code, those sort of things were very helpful. And then I think we sent that off, some draft of that off to legislative services. I would have shared that with you. You gave some pointers and insights and in terms of what you thought might be helpful in the law to make sure that some version of this could become a reality.
And so that is how House Bill 1016 was formed, was
Mhm.
while you were on
1016, that's
vacation.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, 1016.
I,
Uh,
I
that-
have a bunch of them. Like I wasn't there very long, but that was one where you get a copy of the bill after it becomes law. And so I was looking in some old files the other day, and that was one of them that was right there. It's very special.
Since you bring that up, do you think this is the bill that probably made the biggest impact while you were in the state house?
To this day, if I go to Indianapolis and the legislature has changed over tremendously. I mean,
Right.
it's probably 75% of the people. This was, I guess, 10 years ago. We were working on
Yeah.
this, right? Or more than 10, 11 years. Um, so a significant number have changed over. But I for the 25% who are still there, who remember me, if I said, what, can you name a bill that I was involved, this would probably be number one
This is
that they would bring up. And as you recall, the first bill, the draft that went to the House, um, set up. I mean, it rewrote the original safe haven law,
right.
and it allowed it. I mean, it was a very flexible law. It authorized baby boxes. I remember we used different nomenclature that then others wanted us to change, but it passed unanimously, I think, from the Indiana House. It had Republican and Democratic
Yep.
House co-authors on it. I think that everyone saw, okay, here's an opportunity to expand the existing law to deal with a problem that we all should be very interested, regardless of your political affiliation.
Right.
And it was a popular bill. It goes to the Senate, and it gets changed
Chopped
completely.
up. Yeah.
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 And I learned late in the process that the House version that passed probably isn't going to pass the Senate, but maybe there's an opportunity here to at least start to set some of the safety protocols up.
Well, and the conversation, just set the conversation.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about it. Let's say, how can we do this?
So it was so new, right? This idea
Yeah.
was revolutionary.
Yeah, and so and I remember talking about the Senate changing all of this,
Yeah.
and us, saying, okay, well, we want their help. We want the Department of Health, and we
Mhm.
want the Department of Child Services input. We want them to help us on this.
Yeah.
And so we did change it in the Senate, or you changed it in the Senate to basically say that we needed protocols from them,
Yeah.
from the Department of Health, to make protocols, policies, and procedures for the use of baby boxes.
Yep.
And so that passed out of the Senate. And then, of
Yes.
course, at the time, Governor Mike Pence signed that bill into
Mhm.
law. What we didn't know at the time was that it was never going to work for the people who were supposed to do what they were supposed to do.
Right.
And so, and I remember contacting you every couple of weeks. Hey, did we get anything from them? Because I was waiting on these protocols. In the meantime, we were still building the first two boxes. We knew we were going to launch these boxes in 2016,
Right.
and so, but I just wanted their input. I wanted their help. And then at the end of December, you called and said, "Hey, we got a letter
Mhm.
from the Department of Health," and
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
tell our listeners what that said, and then we'll kind of talk about what we did after that.
Yeah, and so as you mentioned, that when the bill passes the House, goes to the Senate, it gets changed completely, and we think to ourselves, well, we can use it as a step in the process. And so
Right.
they ask with the final bill that passed was signed by the governor, which you were at the signing ceremony
Yes,
for that.
I still
Um,
have the pen. By
you have
the
the
way.
pen,
I
right?
do.
Wonderful. And it requires the Indiana Department of Health to set standards and protocols for the implementation of these. And so we view this as okay, one of the concerns that was raised in the Senate was how we're going to make sure this is safe. And so
Right.
we're going to let the regulators, the Department
Yeah.
of Health,
Right.
set those protocols, and you all can
We'll go with it. Yeah.
design around that,
Yeah.
right? And so the letter I get back from them, I remember reaching out to them frequently in the fall and into December because I think their deadline was end of year, saying, where is this? The law requires you to do this. And I get back a letter from the commissioner who later becomes the Surgeon General for the United
Right.
States
Right.
a few years later.
I'm sure he still knows who I am.
And the letter basically says there are no protocols that can be developed that would be safe, and therefore, the answer is that there is no answer.
Well, they said that there's no recommendations.
Yeah,
Yeah, they took the word recommendations and said, well, we're not recommending them
yeah.
because there's no safety.
So they were, I guess, trying to shortcut the law that required them to come up with standards and protocols by saying there are none that can be recommended. And so that I wrote them a letter back, and what I did is I had maybe not all, but a number of co-sponsors and
Yeah.
authors sign this letter from me, and that was again Republicans and Democrats because it had broad support initially. And we sent that back, and the Indianapolis Star got a hold of that letter, and it's the only time I think I've been above the banner on their website, and it was basically that the Department of Health was refusing to do
To
this,
do this, yeah.
and so that's just one of the obstacles that you have hurdled over the years, and seeking the long term goal and vision of ensuring child safety, and that this is becomes a reality, and look at the results that
Well,
has
do you think
happened.
they underestimated us?
I think so. Well, I think this is an example of that, right? Like how many states are you in now?
22.
22 states, right?
22
So
states.
I guarantee that when the commissioner was sending that letter, he never could have imagined
Yeah.
that your organization would be in 22 states, the number of lives that have been saved.
We've had 59 in boxes and 229 with handoffs.
Which is amazing to me because I remember when I was thinking about, you brought this concept, this idea up, and I thought to myself, you mentioned earlier, like when I learned about this, I thought, well, maybe we can educate people, right?
Right.
And I thought, well, this concept will probably never even get used. But, if it helps publicize that this is out there and so forth, then I think it's probably done a good thing. And if you had told me 10 years ago those numbers, I would have been blown away. I never could have imagined, let alone state authorities who were.
So you're
who were
saying
trying to
I was
stand against it.
underestimated.
Yeah, I think so.
And I always knew that if we just brought women options,
Yeah,
if you just bring the options to them, they're going to choose what's best for them. And it might not be what I would choose, and it might not be what you would choose, but it's going to be something that she's going to have to live with for the rest of her life. So let's let her choose what's best for her.
sure.
And I think that's why people truly respect this organization so much, is because we're not making decisions for somebody else. We're letting them make them. And then we're just allowing ourselves, or they're allowing us, to walk alongside them on their journey.
Yeah.
And I love it when a mother trusts me enough to allow me to walk with her, because, my birth mom didn't have that all those years ago. She didn't have anybody to walk alongside her in an unplanned pregnancy that she didn't ask for. But it's kind of my legacy now, and I'm their voice, and I'm so honored to be able to do this work for them and with them, that Christ has kind of led me down. I've always said that there's no way we got to where we are without him driving this bus. There's no way. There have been doors that have been opened that should have never been opened.
Sure.
And there's only one reason that they were. And so let's go back to that. Mr. Jerome Adams, who I'm sure he remembers my name. I bet you if I walked up to him and said, "Hey, I'm Monica Kelsey, the baby box lady," he'd be like, "Oh gosh," But so he sends a letter to us and says they're not going to do it. And I was devastated. I was like, why do they not want to help me change this? I mean, we're finding 2 babies dead in our state every year. I just want to save one. I just want to break that in half. Let's just save 1 baby a year. And they didn't want to help. And so I was like, is there anything stopping me from doing this? And I think you and I had a couple conversations, and
Mhm.
you actually told me that Jim Bopp needed to be on my team.
Yeah.
And you suggested I get a hold of him, and I often say when I speak that he was the prick that I needed
Yeah.
because he hit it head on, and so I contacted him and he said, there's nothing saying you can do it and there's nothing saying you can't. And I
Right.
said, well, then it's legal, right? I mean, I can do this. And he's like, well, I don't recommend it.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not asking for your recommendation. I'm
Sure.
just,
Sure.
can I get in trouble for doing this?
Yeah.
And he said, no, I don't think you can. And so I launched the very first baby box in Woodburn, Indiana,
Yeah.
without the approval of the state of Indiana.
Yeah.
And
Took a risk.
took a risk. I
Yeah.
took a huge risk.
For the betterment of the children who could be saved from this by this.
Well, and I look back now, and that was the right because actually, when the fight started, the Department of Child Services came out, and
Mhm.
Mary Beth Bonaventura, who was the
Mhm.
director for DCS at the time, wrote a letter to us saying, "Shut these boxes down; they're illegal."
Yeah.
And so I went back to Mr. Bopp, the attorney that you suggested, and
Yeah.
I said, what do we do now? And he says, well, I'm going to recommend that you shut these boxes down until you guys come to an agreement. And I'm like, but you told me that I wasn't doing anything illegal. And he says, no, you're not breaking any laws, but this could be a huge fight. And I'm like, well, I signed up for that, put me in, coach.
Yeah.
And so I actually had to sign a letter that he recommended that I shut the boxes down until this was over. And I signed this paper that he had advised me to do that. And I rejected it
Yeah.
and kept
You
them
did it
moving. And
anyway.
to this day,
Yeah.
we've never shut those any boxes down.
Right.
There's been a couple of boxes in Ohio that the locations decided to shut down because of legislation, but we've never shut any boxes down.
What finally caused? How far did DCS take it? What finally got them to back off? Was it changes to the law later that they backed off, or?
Well, Senator Holdman stepped up
Yeah.
and said, I'm going to take this on. And he used to work for the Department of Child
Yeah,
Services,
that's
remember?
right.
And so he said, I'm going to fix this at the next legislative session. That kind of calmed it down. But then also JJ's accident happened.
Mhm.
And so I was kind of preoccupied with my family,
Yeah.
kind of trying to fix my family. And so I kind of just let things slide for a little while, keeping those two boxes open, because one thing that I didn't want is I didn't want a woman who had already heard me out there talking about utilizing these boxes if they needed them, but now shutting them down and they needed it, which, interesting enough, before we actually got this fixed, we had two babies in our
Yeah.
boxes.
Yeah.
And so if I would have shut those down, would baby Grace have been
Right.
saved if baby Grayson, and so let's talk about that for a second, because you were one of the first people that I texted.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it was after midnight, because nobody texted me back until the next morning.
Yeah,
I was like,
yeah.
these people are in bed, but I'm texting them anyway. And so I texted you. I texted Kathy Humbarger.
Uh-huh.
I texted Travis Holdman, and I sent you a photo.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember that.
And what was your thoughts?
Um,
First baby ever saved in a baby box.
amazing, right? Like I said earlier, my thought was, gee, I don't know if this is implemented, if these will be used, and
If they'll make a
um,
difference.
and so I was blown away, because it's like you have this abstract thought, but then once it becomes reality, there's actually a human life that's been impacted by this. It's pretty amazing, and similar to that, you invited me to an event a few years ago, and I got to go up on stage, and I think at the time maybe there were 11 children that had been saved through the boxes that you had up there, and it's just amazing. It's gratifying. I mean, and again, my role in this is in my view tiny, but even to have a small role in something that touches that many lives, these children are going to have lives of their own. They have families. They're going to have families when they're older, presumably, and so, and then their kids are gonna. You're right. It just keeps going, and it's nice. It's gratifying to be able to
Well,
play some small role.
a small role, but yet a risk that you took, because you took a risk fighting for this. And I often look back on the time, even fighting at the state house,
Mhm.
and you didn't back down either. You fought hard through that legislative session, to make sure that it got through the finish line, even if it was them doing protocols, policies, and procedures, because at the time we thought that was what was best anyway.
Mhm.
But you never gave up. You never came back to me and said, Monica, we're just not going to push this bill through. You always had an answer for me. You always, okay, let's try this. Let's try this. There was many times where we came back and we were like, I don't know if we should do this. Remember the hearing, 18 people voted down the baby box. And here we
Yeah.
were like, well, you guys were stupid. Like, why would you even, it was just, you had my back the entire time.
Well, I think, I mean, when you have someone like you being able to testify, then you got a ace in your back pocket, right? So, I mean, how many hearings have you testified in front of throughout the country?
I have no idea.
Like, if you were to
Many,
guess,
many.
dozens and dozens and dozens.
Yeah.
And you tell, I mean, there's a compelling story, and now you have the examples of the work that's been done, the lives that have been saved and touched to be able to share. Um, but even then, back when we thought like, hey, look, this is in the Senate and they're going to take out the entire bill and they want to move this. I knew at the very least that you and others that we had testifying could tell a really compelling story about what this would mean to the lives of Hoosiers. And not only that, those that really were in circumstances that needed this availability, that needed this assistance potentially. So
Right.
I always thought that at the very least, despite legislative hurdles that might be there, so long as you can tell an honest and good faith story and you're doing what you're pursuing is being pursued from the best possible places, then it's a cause worth pursuing in that regard.
Well, and you were at the very first baby box blessing.
Yeah.
You came.
Yeah.
You came. You took time out of your day. And then also a couple of years ago, we had an event here where you
Mhm.
got to meet more of the babies that had been saved.
And I hadn't been here before, and I was blown away. Like,
I,
and to think about what the first prototype that you
Yeah.
brought to one of those hearings,
oh my gosh, that thing
and
was like
compare it to what it is
the
now.
$700 prototype that I
Yeah.
talk about in all of my talks because it was so basic.
Yeah.
It's like there was no electronics to it. It was
Uh-huh.
literally a shell of a box that I paid $700 for. Actually, my husband paid $700 for because I wrote a check from his account to do it. But it was so basic.
Yeah.
And I carried that thing all over just proud.
What's cool though is even then you were explaining to policymakers the safety features that would be inherent within this,
Right.
which now exist, which exist now,
Yes.
right? Like to have that vision of this is what this can and should be, and then to follow through with that, and that the safety features have been so proficient is you followed through with those things that you testified to way back 10 years ago, 11 years ago.
Yeah. Gosh, it's crazy to think how far back
Yeah.
we go. Time just flies.
Yeah.
Time just flies. So what's next for Casey Cox? I mean, are you ever going to go back to the legislator? You ever think about that?
I left 9 years ago this month, and I always said I wouldn't consider it for another 10 years. So it's almost been 10 years. And I still sort of think another 10 years. So I very much have an interest in trying to help people, trying to work on projects, and from what you and I worked on to some of the other things that we did in my brief time there. I don't have a real interest in running for office as we sit here right now. I'm grateful for the experience. I'm thankful my kids, who are now 14, 12, and 9, really have no memory of me being down there.
Right.
And that's been a blessing, actually, because I wouldn't want to do it right now with them growing up. But one of the coolest things I did is I realized in my very last day of session in 2016 that I was probably on my way out. The voters were probably going to be going in a different direction, and we used to get these rule books. And I'd been there for 3 sessions, so I had 3 of them. I had 3 kids. Actually, my wife was pregnant with number 3 at the time. Was just about to give birth, and I wrote them. I wrote a note, like a 2-page note in there for each of them, which at the time they wouldn't be able to understand, right? But as they've gotten older, they can look back on, and so hopefully that inspires them to appreciate public service for the service that it actually is to the public versus anything that they see on TV or might become concerned about, later on.
So in the books that you write, then now I'm just curious. Now
Yeah,
you just
yeah.
opened my curiosity. What do you put in that? I mean, are you talking about your time in the Senate and what you've done, or is it just, inspiration on?
Yeah, it's sort of a note. Each of them are a little bit different, but it's a note to each of them about um, how much I miss them when I'm away from them. That I don't know how long I'll do this. That I hope that when they're older, they're able to look back on this and ask me questions about the things that I worked on and why it was meaningful to me. And that ultimately, I hope that they have an appreciation for serving others when they're older. So
Do you,
that's essentially it.
do you think that they'll go into politics?
Um, my oldest, no. I think my son is very interested. It's funny. He's physically he looks nothing like me. He's going to be about 6 or 7 inches taller than I am, which
You're my
good for
height.
him. But his interests are very aligned with mine. So he is interested in history and in government. And I've noticed he's been walking around the house with a West Point sweatshirt on. I didn't serve in the military, but he says he'd like to go to West Point. He has sort of interests that are there. My youngest, it's too early to tell, I think, still. But if I had to pick one, I'd say my son definitely has some sort of interest, and he'll ask me questions about public policy, about politics, and things like that. So
So,
who knows?
would you support him? I mean, I'm sure you would support him. That
Yeah.
was a stupid
No,
question for me to ask, but
would I
I
talk him
mean,
out of it?
would you try to talk him out of it?
I I wouldn't talk anyone out of it. I would say I've gotten calls over the years since I've left from people I went to school with or others who have thought about running for office, state rep or higher office. And I've said to them, um, I said I wouldn't. I'm really appreciative of it. I mean, the fact that I was able to get involved with your efforts is really meaningful to me. Um, but I also sort of lay out the struggles. Indiana has a part-time legislature, which I think is
Right.
a good thing, but it does make it difficult for someone also trying to have a career and who has a family when Indianapolis is 2.5 hours south, depending on where you're leaving from up here and where you're going down there. So to be real about it, I would advise anyone to say like, okay, why am I going there? What are the things I really want to have an impact on? I also advise sort of on the reality of politics that, or the reality of service in a legislature is I think sometimes people have this idea that they're going to come in and they're going to make all these big changes.
Changes.
And the reality is like leadership controls a lot. And so you have to understand very quickly what is it within my background that I can bring that can allow me to make an impact on the things I care about. So for me, I found very early on, like writing legislation. There actually are very few lawyers in the legislature. There's a ton in Congress. There are very few in the legislature because it's hard to manage a legal practice and be an elected official.
Yeah. I can
But
see
you can
that.
become a resource for others. And so if you do that, you can build like Survivor, you can build alliances and you can then help move items forward. I would also tell people have an end in mind. Like you want to go for how long? Like don't go just forever. Go for like 4 years or like no more than 8. That would be my advice.
I
And have
keep
an
telling my
idea.
husband that, and he just doesn't listen to me.
Yeah, so that what for him that
We're on our third term.
well, some people though are so fantastic
No, well,
that
yeah, he
they
is, but let me just tell you the stress. Well, your wife has got to be like amazing because the stress
she
from
is, yeah.
politics just alone, it's like, oh my gosh, people complaining about trees and trash, and it's like there are so much bigger problems in America than your trees and your trash.
Yeah,
Small town problems, I
yeah, and
guess.
my wife was awesome about all of it. I mean, when we started dating at IU, I was really involved in student government. She thought I might have an interest in doing politics, government, one way or the other someday. And it's funny because at the time she was teaching. I was gone 4 days a week, I mean, not quite half the year, but a few months a year. And then part of the time she was pregnant. And so she was
Well,
awesome
we all
about
know
it.
what you were doing on your
And
spare time, Casey.
so she was great about it. But we also look back like those were sort of the hard years too,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I,
Yeah.
I get that. I get that. Our kids are grown. We're grandparents
Hmm.
now, which is the best job ever.
Have you ever thought about running for anything?
I've thought about it. I've tossed it
Hmm.
around. I don't think I'd be good at it. I have too big of a mouth, Casey. Like it
I
would get
know
me in
that
trouble.
authenticity, which is what you have, is, I think, the number one thing that the voters are looking for.
Oh gosh, I don't know. I would definitely be opening my mouth and inserting my foot way too often if I was a legislator. But I'll tell you what, I would never back down. That would be the one thing that they would get what they voted for. I would
Sure.
never back down, and I would always put up a fight because the right thing to do is always the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I think with Safe Haven Baby Boxes, the right thing to do was to launch without the support of the Indiana legislator
Yeah.
in return to save 229 lives.
And it led, I think, to the second wave of legislation, which you mentioned, Senator Oldman authored, and then I think then it sort of gave it validation, right? I mean, you had that, but then it came along after, and so without you taking that risk, um, y- I I imagine you wouldn't be where you are today, and so thank you for being willing to do that.
Well, thank you for believing in me and pushing the very first baby box bill in America to get through the House, through the Senate, to the governor, only to be shot down by. But you know what? We did it.
Yeah.
You know, at the end of the day, we didn't give up. And
We had a
you,
conversation with a lot of people, right?
we
Like
did.
to that point, that original legislation didn't become what I had hoped it would be when I was writing it on vacation in that summer. But it started a conversation that I thought, allowed you all to take it off to make much more of it. So
Well, and you know, Indiana now, the first responders in Indiana know more about the safe haven
yeah,
law than any other state in this country.
yeah,
The education that is happening in the schools is happening the most in Indiana,
yeah.
and that's all because of a conversation between you and I
Hmm,
back in
that's cool. Yeah,
2014.
yeah.
Just wanting to change, make Indiana better.
Well,
And so,
it's a honor to be a small part of the story.
well, I want you to continue to be a part of my story. I've asked you a couple of times. I'm going to ask you again. I've asked you, and you keep saying that you're too busy, and so you might still be too busy. But I'm not on my board of directors, but
Yeah,
I know a guy,
yeah, is
and
that
yeah,
right?
I know a guy that could
You may have
probably.
some influence.
Yeah, I might have a little bit of influence, but I would love for you to join our board of directors. You would obviously have to be voted on, but I would
Sure.
love to put your name in the hat and add you to this ministry that you have been a part of since the beginning. Even if it was just a small part, I would love for
Yeah.
you to continue your small part with Safe Haven Baby
Well, it
Boxes.
was you mentioned a couple year and a half ago or so. I came out here for the first time since you moved here and was blown away. And I remember saying something to my wife about how after I left the legislature, I sort of it wasn't on purpose, but I became disconnected from a lot of the groups that I had worked on legislation related to. And I came back here and I said to her, it meant a lot to me to be involved in that small role. And I'd like to do more of that and getting back in touch and pursuing things that mean a lot to me. So you are welcome to put my name in the hat if the board so chose to honor me in that way. I'd be happy to participate on the board.
Well, if the board doesn't put you in, then I don't have the right board for sure.
Yeah,
But thank you. Thank you for being a part of our story. Thank you for
absolutely.
being a part of the beginning. Thank you for believing in me and just pushing it through the finish line, even if it wasn't what you had envisioned. I think at the end of the day, we did what was right, and Christ took it from there
Absolutely.
and allowed us to be, the hands and feet. So. Well, you guys heard it here first. Casey Cox will be the newest member of our board of directors as soon as I get my board of directors to vote him in. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you for believing in us. Thank you for supporting us. And thank you, Casey, for being a part of our story. God bless you, and God bless you guys.